Hey, welcome to the show. I have two awesome guests for you joining me today on Stand Up. Both Spencer Ackerman and Christian Finnegan join me. It's Stand Up Light because I'm doing no news segment. That's every Friday because on Thursday nights we hang out. Anyone who subscribes to the show gets the link. As little as $5, you can join us. And if you weren't there Thursday night, last night, then you missed out in an amazing, magical, emotional conversation. But I will share it here on the podcast next week. No time to turn it around right now. But two Marines, Matthew Ho and Kate Wyatt, joined us. And Matt is the person who tweeted the information, the news about Kate's Marine husband, Derek, dying. And if it were not for Matt, maybe I never would have met and gotten to know Kate. So it was a pretty cool thing to meet, to introduce the both of them. And that happened, and everybody there experienced a really moving experience on the Hangout, the Stand-Up Happy Hour Hangout Thursday last night. And again, I'll share that with you next week because it was that good. So that's what happened last night. We don't do the news on the Friday. It's a little lighter show, but two amazing interviews today. Very, very happy to share with you my interview with Spencer Ackerman, who is an award-winning reporter, national security correspondent, whose new book, Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump, is simply the most important book I've read on this subject matter and the war on terror, if you will. And I've read most of them and interviewed so many of the authors. But this is the one because it puts it all together. Coming up, I've got another great conversation with Christian Finnegan, but right now I'm just going to throw you right into my conversation with Spencer Ackerman. He's on Twitter at Attackerman. You can find it all in the show notes. It'd be a big deal if you let him know that you heard him here on Stand Up. Here we go right now. Spencer Ackerman, you did it. This is the most important book on the global shitstorm called The War on Terror. And I think I've interviewed all the authors. I've read many of the books. I don't remember anything. But this book is so important. And I just want to say congratulations. It must have been horrendously, emotionally exhausting for you.
Yeah, not to, make you into my shrink, but this was not a pleasant book to write. It was also something of a distillation and second draft of all of my work as a reporter. This is the War on Terror is the only thing that I've covered for 20 years.
Yeah, and you've done an amazing job. Would you mind just kind of talking just a little bit, kind of a list of kind of the jobs you've had? Because you both worked in newsrooms, you've worked in the field, you've been embedded, unembedded. What's the difference? Could you just tell us a little bit about your reporting?
Sure. So I graduated, I'm 41 years old. I graduated college in 2002. So, hooray, 3 major recessions of my lifetime. The total destruction of a viable economy for journalism. And like a fool, this is what I devoted my life to, and worked for a bunch of different places, usually on staff. Haven't done a tremendous amount as a freelance reporter. Most of it, I've been based either in Washington, D.C. or in New York. Worked for In Order, The New Republic, Talking Points Memo, a website that no longer exists called The Washington Independent, Wired Magazine, The Guardian, and The Daily Beast. So I've done newspaper reporting, magazine reporting, blogging. It's kind of been the whole thing. And throughout, I've tried to pursue not just, me popping off, but, acting as a reporter ought to, with the proportion of having, 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. And I've reported from Iraq. I've reported from Afghanistan. Embedding and unembedding means that sometimes I did this with the U.S. military, and other times I did it on my own, out talking to Iraqis and Afghans and so forth. Reported from Guantanamo Bay, reported from Navy ships, from Army bases around the country and around the world. Once was on a submarine. That was kind of wild. I have, in the course of this, exposed really disgusting counterterrorism training at the FBI that targeted Muslims Muslims, and, had the impact, I'm happy to say, of getting a lot of those materials purged from the FBI, which is something that earned me the undying gratitude, as you can imagine, of a lot of the far right. I was one of the reporters at The Guardian who reported on Edward Snowden's exposure of the NSA. That was real. That was another experience that led directly to this book. And then also, as time went on, I became interested in the ways in which it seemed like, traditional national security reporting, I've used that term in quotes. I think it's a bad and problematic term, but nevertheless, it's sort of the way these things are discussed, really tries to kind of stop at the water's edge and doesn't sufficiently look at the continuities between what we do abroad and what we do at home. And I tried to kind of break down that distinction through reporting on one of the most infamous torturers at Guantanamo Bay, who honed his craft as a police interrogator in Chicago. And in the course of reporting on that guy, Detective Robert Zuley, I discovered basically is like, the basically backs of my notebook pages, hearing people talk about policing in Chicago when I went to Chicago to do this reporting. They're like, oh yeah, we have a black site here. Yeah. The police have a black site. Yeah. They use a warehouse on the west side. And I was like, really? What is this? And I discovered that indeed, at a place called Homan Square, the Chicago police would, over the course of 20 years, and still to this day, it is still open, they would take overwhelmingly black and brown Chicagoans, often on, drug or gun pretexts or vice pretexts, to this warehouse and hold them without any record being kept of them being there, and their time being booked, and their formal stay before they get to see a judge accordingly happens only after they were let out of this place, Homan Square. And you can imagine, once that place doesn't put out a record of where you are, an atmosphere of impunity inside takes hold. And so that was another story that I did that was a kind of step on the road to this book.
Yeah, I mean, so much amazing work over the years, and you touch on obviously a lot of that in reference, a lot of that in the book. So the book starts by introducing us to a terrorist and like a terrorist training camp almost. Why did you start the book that way, and tell us a little bit about this terrorist?
So I wanted to start the book with a journalistic cliche that has kind of characterized a lot of the reporting on the war on terror and accordingly shaped our perception of it. I wanted to start out in a scary, remote place surrounded by men with guns. I didn't go to this place, by the way. This starts out kind of 20 years in the past, more than that at this point. And we would see these characters who were violent people motivated by a psychotic interpretation of their religion, which opens the door to the racism and fascism that they espouse as the right way, obviously also the misogyny that they believe is necessary to see the world, the kind of world that they want manifest on Earth. Except what was important to me is that these people be white. That we
Wait a second.
Exactly. There's the twist.
Wait a second. Hold on.
White people do this too?
Mostly in America. It's mostly. Exactly. That's the whole big shebang about the last 20 years is how much time, resources, and money we have spent fighting terrorists overseas and creating more over there, everywhere we go, and then ignoring the ones we have here and then electing them.
And this was important to see what the war on terror is, because when we see, the only way I found that we could really see the full war on terror, see its implications, see the way that it operates, and see who it targets, is by looking at who are the exceptions, who it never targets, who it exempts, and then who fundamentally through that exemption, tacitly, it empowers. What will they do over time as that circumstance persists? They'll do what they've always done. White supremacist terrorism is the oldest, deadliest, and most resilient form of terrorism in American history. It is the form of terrorism that feeds from the same American history that mainstream America feeds off of. It feeds off of national myths. It feeds off of the ideas that America is in fact a country for white people. And the war on terror tells you that a white man with a flag and a gun isn't a terrorist. He's a counter-terrorist.
He's a patriot as well.
He's a patriot. That's what they call themselves.
That I remember learning, from stand-up comedians in New York City, black stand-up comedians in New York City post 9/11 did a very derivative joke about how they enjoyed watching white people be afraid of terrorists for the first time. And it was such an enlightening experience to watch those jokes, those observations, because of what you just said about white terrorism. We're talking, of course, about Timothy McVeigh and Oklahoma City, which you write in depth about, who his influences were, what his manifesto was, and what he represents in America today to a certain segment of the population. Of course, you trace this. I think the subtitle of the book is the most important part, how the 9/11 era destabilized America, produced Trump. Spencer, I'm very nervous to talk to you today because this book has so much in it, and I only have 30 minutes with you. So, of course, I try to con you into keep coming back and doing part 2, 3, and 4 in front of a live audience and whatever I can to cover this. So here I go. The big question I kind of wanted to ask was, after 9/11, I was in New York City, lost friends, smelled the burning and the bodies, and I can't talk about it. I don't talk about it. I don't think about it as much. I won't go to that museum ever again, all that. But I just remember my main emotion or reaction was, why? Why did they do this? So I started researching it. He didn't have to go far. Bin Laden put out a bunch of tapes.
He tells you exactly what he's about.
And what our leaders told us, and to some extent the media, which you write and can talk about, was something completely different. And it was, I to this day, am still outraged that was what we were sold. What were we sold, and what did it lead to? And what happened to critics like Bill Maher, the Dixie Chicks, and Susan Sontag in The New Yorker?
What we were sold was a patriotic veil of unreality that concealed the reality of what America does overseas. It conceals the violence that it inflicts, in particular at this point in history. I mean, still today, obviously, but at that point of history, it was concerned with what it inflicted on the Muslim world, not just with the bombs that it dropped with impunity, not just with the sanctions that killed however many Iraqi children while leaving the regime of Saddam Hussein largely unaffected, not just the exceptions that it allowed for itself to destabilize Muslim countries like Afghanistan. And then as well, bin Laden, points out that the United States, because this is a geopolitical fact, is the principal supporter of Israel that allows Israel to maintain the institutionalized system of, we should call it what it is, apartheid over the Palestinian people. And where bin Laden obviously goes real fucking wrong, and I don't want anyone to get it remotely twisted, is he has a psychotic, violent prescription for this. And he also manipulates religious, both history and justification, in order to rationalize violence and say that it is divinely required. This is nonsense. And what happens instead is the United States takes half of that critique. It says that the only things that matter in that critique are the religious justifications for violence, not the material conditions that the United States is producing and driving people into being sympathetic, as some of them were, to Osama bin Laden. The vast majority of the Muslim world, the Arab world as well as the Muslim world, was not sympathetic to Osama bin Laden. But the United States treated them without that distinction. That is the origins of the war on terror. When people tried to say that, in fact, what not just Bush, but the entire political establishment, the entire journalistic establishment pretty much said was the explanations for the war on terror, that the United States was targeted by people who hated freedom and were seeking to seek revenge on the United States in order to strike a blow for God against this infidel freedom. They were shouted down. People like Susan Sontag, a titan of American literature, one of the finest authors America produced in the 20th century, wrote a 3-paragraph item for The New Yorker shortly after 9/11, in which she said, 9/11's violence has a historical context, and we ignore that at our peril.
Yes.
And then we ignored it to our peril. And for the next, Susan Sontag, for what turns out will be the last 3 years of her life, labors under the shadow of what we would now call being canceled. The culture of 9/11 was a cancel culture. You were not allowed, you were not considered respectable, you were not considered serious, and you would not be given major platforms to express the view that the 9/11 attacks did not result simply from the machinations of inscrutable, non-white, savage fanatics, but in fact from material conditions that the United States helps to create, and that the United States' war was helping accelerate under the guise of combating. And the Dixie Chicks, one of the most popular country music acts in the entire country, which probably means the world, say something as anodyne on the eve of the invasion of Iraq that as Texans, they were embarrassed to be Texans like George W. Bush. For that, there was an orgiastic public destruction of their CDs.
Yes.
With like steamrollers destroying Dixie Chicks CDs. For saying something as simple as that, Bill Maher, who I have a lot of disagreements with, says after 9/11 that, you know, whatever else you want to say about the 9/11 hijackers, they're not cowards. I kind of think that's still a shitty critique. Like, what does that actually get you? Like, what does that reveal?
Yeah,
that strikes me more like empty provocation that considers itself to be substantive, which seems like that dude's shtick. But nevertheless, he gets canceled from the fucking White House. Ari Fleischer tells people, in light of what Bill Maher says, that they need to watch what they say and watch what they do.
Right.
The White House spokesman says that, and Bill Maher gets his show canceled. Regardless of what I think of the substance of Maher's comments, he didn't deserve that. And it wasn't really about Maher. It was about setting firm boundaries for what you were allowed to say and accordingly what you were allowed to believe.
By not asking the question, by not trying to analyze the solutions to fight al-Qaeda, to prevent another terrorist attack in different ways, and by all the lies that you just talked about or the way that they sold it, they did such a disservice. And after 20 years, what did we get? And I would argue that we got more enemies. And so would so many who served in that war, especially the interrogators who would interrogate al-Qaeda suspect or terrorists, say, why are you coming to fight Americans in Iraq, whatever? And they would say anything from, have you seen the Abu Ghraib video? What about what happened at Bagram or Gitmo? Like torture and all of the horrible war crimes that you write about Eddie Gallagher. But there were so many more as well that did horrible things. All of that was used as propaganda. The bin Ladens of the world, the extremists, they didn't have to do anything. They just let us shoot ourselves in the dick over and over and over is my shitty analysis. What would you add, or where am I wrong?
The greatest military strategies, the military strategies that will be most successful, are strategies that depend on an adversary acting in characteristic ways, that depend on an adversary just getting to be itself. And that was what bin Laden saw about the United States. Bin Laden didn't get what he wanted. Bin Laden leads to a pretty ironic end. He is eclipsed. The children of his revolution end up getting eaten. The descendants of al-Qaeda, which become ISIS, go to war with al-Qaeda. And bin Laden's something we never really talk about that I think we really ought to about Osama bin Laden is that he was a billionaire. We don't often understand bin Laden in that context. This is one of the richest fucking men alive. And he does an extreme version of what billionaires around the world do, which is play with other people's lives. That's Osama bin Laden. That is the man who is the reason why 2,900 almost of my neighbors burned to death on 9/11. Yeah. That is something that, we have to always remember about bin Laden, not to ever excuse him, but to contextualize him and to understand that bin Laden recognized that, as he puts it in 2004, all we have to do is wave a little cloth that says al-Qaeda on it. And then the Americans will come running. they will bring about their violent works, and the believers will rally against them because of what America is doing to them. And that way we will achieve what he calls bleeding America to bankruptcy. He didn't really mean like literal bankruptcy. What he meant was that the United States would cause itself such imperial overstretch and inspire such resistance that its position in the Muslim world, particularly not just of like direct violent actions, but also backstopping and underwriting the violent actions of its client states in the Muslim world would ultimately evaporate. Right. Bin Laden was ultimately wrong about that. It turns out that the United States will be very, very willing for a very, very long period of time to sustain these activities. And it will also perversely describe the alternatives to actual, dismantling this incredibly violent apparatus of national security as giving bin Laden what he wants.
I wanted to spend, I guess, the last maybe question or two here talking about the sections in the book where you take to task both the liberal American public reaction as well as the leadership in the Democratic Party, because my audience is certainly mostly, I would imagine, very, very progressive. They already know how to feel and a lot more about the neoconservatives and the right, and certainly, how it leads to Trump. It's interesting, one billionaire, bin Laden, leading to another billionaire. We could talk about that. But I thought it would be best to have you touch on kind of the liberal reaction and as well as the Democratic leadership from John Kerry to the Clintons to Biden to Obama, drones, mass surveillance, the things that happened on their watch, the things they looked away from, the things they didn't sell or aren't selling. Tell me a little bit about that section, which is a huge part of your book.
Yeah, so basically the third chapter in my book introduces this theme, and it's called Liberal Complicity in the War on Terror.
Yeah.
And it's about how Democratic elites don't resist the war on terror. They go along with it. They go along with the policies of immigration suppression and Islamophobia that aid nativism, while they sort of try, sometimes not at all, definitely not before, 2004, to kind of trim it on the margins while leaving the core thing in place. And that leads to, such things as, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden voting for the Iraq War, to things that, might be a little bit, more obscure at this point, like a democratic hysteria over port operations that had been taken over by a company from, of all places, the United Arab Emirates.
I remember that. Happening, and the way you write about that is that's really, really helpful to understand, and a great point to make. Sorry, keep going.
And, when we get to Obama, are you a Lord of the Rings guy?
I mean, I watched all the movies, but I didn't read it and memorize it like Colbert.
So you remember, like in flashback, when they're telling the story of how, the first alliance of elves and men defeats Sauron?
No, but go ahead.
Okay, well, the king of the elves, Elrond, and the king of men, Isildur, now have the defeated enemy Sauron's tool, the ring, the One Ring, the concentration of his evil power. And Elrond's like, we got to go to Mount Doom and throw this thing in the fire and destroy it, and then we'll have really won. And when they get there, he's yelling for his buddy Isildur to throw it in the fire. And Isildur says, well, it's just so powerful. What if instead I could wield it? And if it had, a non-evil person wielding it, what amazing things would I be able to do? And then he puts the ring on his finger, and eventually, not only is he corrupted, but Sauron would come, roaring back to life. And that's how I view Barack Obama. That Barack Obama gets elected off of an extremely powerful and frustrated anti-war sentiment amongst the progressive bases, the Democratic Party, that's been disgusted at the way the Democratic Party's acquiesced, not just to the Iraq War, but to a lot of really scary things during the Bush administration. And Obama, who's untainted by the Iraq War and is the only presidential candidate to launch a very full-throated refusal to continue the war, to aggressively defend withdrawing from the war. That became deeply inspiring to a lot of people. But what we often didn't listen to was Obama simultaneously saying that he considered the war on terror a necessary continuation, that the problem with the Iraq war, amongst other problems, was that it was a distraction from the necessary work of the war on terror. And that's how we get in the spring of 2008, as Obama is looking forward to becoming president himself as a senator, he votes to legalize tremendous amount of previously illegal mass surveillance conducted by the NSA. And when he becomes president, he views torture as completely unacceptable. And so he bans it. But because he is committed to the war on terror, he needs the CIA, the torturers themselves, to do things like execute the drone strikes. Right. So he is not in a position to provide any accountability for what was done to so many human beings. The Senate torture report identifies the figure of 119 of them. No one in that report believes it was just 119 people.
Right.
I write about that on my Substack. Forever Wars. Really quick, Obama wraps up the war in this belt of bureaucratic process that masquerades as the rule of law, and uses that to expand drone strikes and take a lot of other actions in the war on terror, such as the escalation of the Afghanistan war, that create not an alternative to the war on terror, but the maintenance of the war on terror, and a structure that he believes is sustainable for future operations of the war on terror, because he believes that other good liberals like Hillary Clinton will be the people that inherit the war on terror, and they can make the judgment of what's responsible with the one ring on their finger. And instead, it's Donald Trump, and it doesn't work that way.
So much more to talk about with you. Everybody should buy the book, subscribe to the Substack. Spencer Ackerman, congratulations on writing the most important book of our generation on this issue. Thank you.
Pete, I don't know about that, but thank you so much.
Well, I meant it. Thank you very much. There you go, Spencer Ackerman. I really did. I've read all of them. There's a lot of really great literature out there from people like Steve Cole to Ahmed Rashid and Lawrence Wright, Ali Soufan. I mean, there's so many books and experts who I've read over the years on this issue and war on terror and all of it. Tom Ricks on Iraq, a lot of it. But this puts it all together, puts all of those books together. And I cannot recommend a book. If you are interested in national security and foreign policy, if you enjoyed any part of that, you will thoroughly enjoy it and get educated by this very, very important book. I highly recommend you go buy it right now. And most importantly for me in this podcast, if you could let Spencer know that you heard him on the show. And I think usually the best way to do that is on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, go get a Twitter account just to thank Spencer. And he is at Attackerman, ATTACKERMAN, Spencer Ackerman. Okay, well, it is Friday. And that means Christian Finnegan joins me pretty much every Friday. We call it Finnegan Fridays. One of the most thoughtful, intelligent, and hilarious people I know, Christian Finnegan. He is on Twitter at Christ Finnegan. Oh, God, I almost did it again. And I think he just announced that he's going to be in Atlantic City at the Celebrity Theater September 3rd and 4th, accomedyclub.com for tickets. If anybody is going to be in Atlantic City, you can catch Christian there on Labor Day weekend. Okay, here's my latest conversation with Christian. It's always great. It's always good. And here we go.
Yes, I definitely ramp up the sort of effeteness on stage. I definitely probably use a little bit more of a pretentious vocabulary on stage than I would in day-to-day conversation. I kind of like the sort of mock presentational value of like, ribald humor.
Well, I make that joke to get me back to what I said before I hit record, which was took the family photo on vacation. And I really wanted to tweet it out or Instagram or whatever and just talk about how gay I look in my photo with my wife and daughters. And I never got, decide what I would say, but I was like, I guess I can't say I'm the gay looking one. I guess I can't say that anymore. And you said something about there being a period of time where that kind of changed. And then, well, you know what you said. And I thought it was a good answer.
You know what you said.
You said the F word 50 times.
I mean, I certainly have gone to that well for comedy a lot over the years.
I have two. I feel like maybe I'm not supposed to anymore. And I'm not sure why.
I wouldn't say it's a question of supposed to. I just don't think it's going to yield. First of all, I don't think it will yield what it used to yield. And I think that people have it just won't have the same success because the idea of simply looking gay isn't in and of itself funny. And people will wonder if you're making that joke, like, is it supposed to be a slam? And you in your head might know that it's not. But then what we were saying off mic is, I think the response to that would be like, well, what does gay look like?
Right. Me,
Pete, like, tell me, what does gay look like? Yeah. And why is that a bad way to look? And again, I'm talking to myself here because I've done bits that's basically the same punchline.
That's the thing. Like, I so badly want to make gay jokes that I think I need to just suck one dick so that I can make them. Because at what point are you able to make these jokes? Because I'm thinking about every single gay. I'm thinking about men, but women too. Comics, and they make their whole act might be about their sexual orientation. But what defines at this point that?
I guess what I would say is that idea is more interesting and I think more worthy of exploration in a comedy way than just being like, haha, I look gay. Right. You know what I mean? Like, sure. Why is it important to me? Like, why do I care whether I look gay or not? Or like, what does it mean? Or does that reflect? Yeah. I mean, there's a little more meat on the bone as opposed to just this sort of simple, I look gay, where I feel like maybe 5 years ago, people would sort of laugh in recognition of, oh my God, he totally does, or whatever. Whereas now it would just be like, yeah, sure. 5 of the people I work with are gay. Yeah, who cares? Yeah. You know what I mean?
I just got introduced to, I guess I'm a little bit behind, pansexual. Familiar with this?
It's where you have sex with cookware?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it was weird because the way I got introduced to it is I walked in the kitchen, my daughter was having sex with a crock pot.
Yeesh.
No.
Man,
did I delete that from the podcast?
They start so young.
So my daughter defined it as you're interested in anybody regardless of their gender, identity or their sexual orientation or whatever. And then I guess the other one was you'll have sex with men, women, or trans people as well. And I got a little frustrated. I was like, no, you can't. No, you're one or the other. You're bisexual or you're straight. A trans person is a woman or a man. They identify as male or female. Or now there's non-binary. Yes. They don't identify as anything. It's very,
sometimes the nomenclature starts to collapse in on itself. And in order to be correct, you have to then be hypocritical and incorrect in a different way. Yeah, you're right. Because if you're saying, if your stance is that trans women are women, then having sex with a trans woman shouldn't be different than having sex with a woman. It would, I mean? But again, it's like, these are the kind of things that we, as a certain age, instinctively roll our eyes at. And I roll my eyes at it. But I also know that at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter what I think. The world is going to change as it changes. I think the rules are still being written. This is a new field of inquiry. And it's probably going to take a couple of generations for sort of trend lines to fully emerge. Yep. Yeah. It's,
I said,
it's like we've opened Pandora's box in not a bad way. That always has a negative connotation. But, we've sort of entered this new era of sort of recognizing gender diversity and sexual diversity and things like that. And it's going to take a while before it really shakes out in sort of a dominant theory of thought.
Well, I don't want it to take for a while, and I try to shake it out, like I try to force it out. So when we were taking a photo, instead of saying this did happen, instead of saying while somebody was taking a photo of me, instead of the joke being "Do I look gay?" I said to my daughter Ava, my 16-year-old, I go, "Do I look pan?" And she was like really offended. She's like, "Not funny, not funny." I was like, okay, yeah. It's not.
Dude,
it's not.
We were talking this off mic. You have to watch White Lotus. You have to. This for people who are listening.
I don't
probably
have to
most
watch
of you.
Anything, and nothing irks me more than everything you say.
Everything you say is a callback to this show. It's so hilarious because there's one, and I don't want to I guess this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's not really. Steve Zahn's character at one point
I love
finds
Steve
out.
Zahn.
Yeah. And you would be the Steve Zahn character in White Lotus. At one point, he finds out that his father, who he thought had died of cancer, actually died of AIDS and was secretly gay.
Wow.
And he finds this out over the phone, but it completely shakes his perception about who he is and what his whole life has been. And he has trouble dealing with that. And he expresses that he has trouble dealing with it. And his college-age daughter is like, you shouldn't say that. Like, you sound homophobic right now. You know what I mean? Even though it's so like what you're describing about your interaction with your daughter over the term pan, that dynamic plays out literally in this show.
By the way, I met a guy on vacation. He is like my dad's age. He's like early 70s, mid 70s. And his dad was gay. And so I was like, what would be more interesting? I was asking if he was still alive. Because I was like, what could be more interesting than just interviewing like a 90-year-old gay male American? Like who was out, at least to some extent, most of his life or in a relationship. Like that must be a fascinating story.
My favorite uncle came out in his early 50s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then did you stop loving him?
Oh, we haven't spoken in decades. No, I'm joking. He's still one of my favorite people in the entire world.
My uncle's gay too.
I think that he might have thought I was, which is why we had a particularly close relationship. But no, meaning
not that he wanted to do anything inappropriate. Meaning
no, good Lord, no. But I think that he maybe wondered. I was kind of at times I had a bit of a darkness about me as a kid in certain periods of my life, and I think that he might
thought you were struggling,
and he did before he came out of the closet. Like he was an alcoholic, and he was doing a lot of very self-loathing type stuff because he couldn't really come to terms with who he was. And I think that maybe he thought that we were similar in that. And that might have been part of the reason why we became probably closer than my brothers or other cousins were. Like we had a very tight relationship other than his actual daughter, But yeah, he came to visit me once. I was waiting tables in the West Village in college. And he and his friend John came and just sat, and they knew I was there, and he came to see me, and then kind of at the very end of the meal kind of took me aside, and he's like, it was really important for me to come and see you and thank you and I love you and all that. And I was kind of like, why is he being so weird? And then 2 minutes after he walked out the door, I was like, holy shit, like it all hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was so obvious. It was so obvious.
But he didn't say anything. He didn't have to say.
No, but him bringing this man with him, that was his way of coming out to me.
Was that appropriate? Do you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, I was in college.
You were fine with that.
Yeah. It was fine. It was fine if I was in 6th grade. But I mean, it was.
No, I mean appropriate that he didn't say the words like this is my.
Yeah, people got to. I mean, especially we're talking. This is in the early to mid 90s. And we forget how much progress has been made over the past 25 years. No, I thought it was the perfect way to do it. And
were you done?
Yeah, basically.
My cousin told me when I was 14, she's 1 year older than me. We were on the phone. She's like, Uncle Jim is gay, right? And I was like, what? No. I didn't know that. And she started making fun of me for not knowing. How could you not know? Like, seriously, you didn't know that? Like, everybody knows that. And I was like, I didn't know that. And then it came all crashing down. I was like, oh, yeah, that makes so much sense for all these different reasons. And that was it. That was it. That was the end of it.
It's got to be so strange for someone who's in their teens or 20s now, early 20s, to understand just how different it was. And I'm not talking about just for gay people. I'm talking just in general, the sort of discussion around quote unquote sexual preference at the time, and how, I didn't grow up in like the 50s where you would be, run out of town or in most, at least where I lived in the Northeast. But definitely it was not a thing that people went around announcing.
No.
You went away, you moved to New York City or you moved to Provincetown and you lived your life in that culture. But But yeah, I mean, I don't think that, you know, somebody who's 18 years old can really appreciate it. Whether you're gay or straight, I don't think you can just understand how radically things have changed.
It's so crazy now where like the kids today, and not all the time, but it can be considered, you know, really cool to be. It's like an attribute. It's a strength to be something other than normatively straight. And, you know, that's also bizarre. I mean, also, I'm. Some people are almost rooting for. Like, part of me wants my daughters to be attracted to women because boys seem like a lot of trouble sometimes. But that's also ridiculous too, because there's a lot.
That's a different. Yeah, that's a different sensation.
My daughter met this guy. Finally, she met a really great guy. Like, he was really smart, really funny, very.
His name is Ted Bundy,
thoughtful,
and he's.
And in the end, yeah, he actually did a terrible thing to her. No, he was really cool, but it was, for me, it was. She just hasn't met a guy yet that was, you know, really nice and kind and thoughtful. Or frankly, you know, we live in kind of a conservative area, much less, you know, kind of progressive. So a lot of these guys are kind of just. But when we talk about the progress on gender and sexual orientation, it's like we continue to make a lot of progress. And you're remarking on how kind of quickly it happened or how much has changed. And yet when it comes to race, which is also kind of a social construct like that, we're definitely going backwards. I kind of find that really interesting. And then even within the black community that is still kind of not, you know, still behind the times, I would argue, on gay, on LGBT issues, but they're still far further than
I would say.
Than they were.
Well, first of all, I wonder if even using the term progress maybe isn't the clearest way to describe what's happened, because I don't want to just act as if, you know, we should be patting ourselves on the back on how great things are now. And, you know, and people should be thankful for how much progress we've had. Things have just changed. They've changed. I think it's a positive thing, obviously. And I think it's a natural thing. I think cultural changes happen because they have to happen. There's honestly, you know, it was destined to happen, you know, that this discussion of gender and trans issues and things like that, it was time to have these conversations, and those things happen whether people want them to or not within certain cultures. I would say honestly that, you know, we're two white dudes talking about the black community, and I would say that the change.
No, I'm not. Well, hold on. How are we talking about the black community? I'm saying when it comes to race, we're.
Oh no, you're talking about behind the times in terms of.
Oh, I did say
issues.
Black people have not made.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I would say that, yes, there's obviously very specific and very defensible reasons why. But I would say that the change in like the hip hop and professional sports and some of the other professions that are dominated, you know, by, you know, black artists and athletes and whatnot, that their change or progress has actually been more than white people. I mean, they started off at a different place, but, you know, so much of the reasons for that are, you know, the emasculation, the sort of destruction of black masculinity all throughout slavery and stuff like that. And so there's more tied up in being a man for a black man.
But I would have to separate what you're saying, you know, between entertainment and sports.
Dude, there are gay people on professional sports teams that have. It hasn't happened a lot, but dude, you will see there are a number of athletes, famous, big time professional athletes, who come out in favor. They might not come out as gay, but I'm saying they come out in favor of gay rights. They are very. Reggie Bullock, who is a basketball player who played for the Knicks last year, and he's not like a superstar, but he's an NBA player, is like a massive trans activist. I mean, granted, his sister was murdered. His sister was trans and was murdered. And so you could say that obviously he has a personal reason to be involved, but that's the kind of thing that never would have happened 15 years ago. He would have been, you know, shunned and laughed off out of black culture. That I'm saying things really have changed even within hip hop and sports and things like that.
I'm just saying in sports, it's easier. It's more expected to be more masculine, period.
Well, of course,
even women's sports. And in entertainment, like, no one thought Michael Jackson was masculine, or who's another, you know, person we thought, I guess maybe he's a bad example, but like a straight entertainer that seems, doesn't matter. Prince
seems pretty flamboyant. And who care? Who like nobody? Did anybody care? David Bowie? Did anybody care about that?
I mean, I wonder. Back then, I don't know if we had gone back in time, if we were the age we are now. Back then, maybe our view would be different. I don't know.
I feel like there's a couple well-known gay comics that still aren't out publicly.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
thinking about a couple of people I'll tell you later. But so, legends even. I wanted to also ask you, of course, about Afghanistan because you are.
It's funny. I almost was gonna compliment this. It's like, wow, I can't believe we've made it through the bleakest news week in months, and all we've talked about is us and our dumb views of social issues. Like, I was kind of impressed that we've managed to avoid.
I will say this: like, I did that on purpose.
Multiple elephants in the room.
I did that on purpose because I've done. Like almost every guest has been, national security expert this week, and including on this episode, I've got Spencer Ackerman with you, and he's the best.
Oh wow, yeah.
But I mean, I think that a lot of people haven't listened to the plan that you laid out years ago for the future of Afghanistan, and I thought maybe you would want to take this opportunity to present it.
Well, I know what you're referring to, but I just feel like if we made a really good mixtape and put together some really good movies and just showed them to the Afghans and be like, isn't this better, guys?
That was
good food.
Your joke on Twitter wasn't like it was on the surface. It was funny, but then there was like three deeper, I think, meanings to it, which is, I'm trying to find it now.
I said something to the effect of, not to sound stuck up, but I'm still pretty sure I could turn Afghanistan into a Western style democracy.
Right.
Like, I'm not
to sound stuck up, but I still kind of think I could turn Afghanistan. I could turn Afghanistan into a Western style democracy. Not saying I want to, just saying. So, but
because I think that is the mentality. I think that is why, because we can't understand, like, why wouldn't they want this? Like, why wouldn't you want to be a democracy? Why wouldn't you want industry? Why wouldn't you want better health services? Like, why wouldn't you want to live in the 21st century? Why would you want to live in the 15th century? Like, what's appealing to that? And I mean, intellectually, I can tell myself all the reasons why they've rejected modernity and all these things. But why? And I think that is maybe one of the sort of colonizers' attitude.
Yeah.
Is like, can't you see that this is better? And why don't you want this? And we've shown you how to act that way. And that is doomed to failure. And you think after Vietnam, we would have figured that out. But
that's also, though, true of, I think of, maybe you have an example as well, but from my life, I think of Sicilian culture. And they're really just not very capitalist, historically they're kind of more communist. But you could argue, and it would be offensive to them probably, but maybe it wouldn't be, that they're kind of lazy when it comes to work. And it's also interesting that when you're there on the beach, they're not trying to sell you things everywhere. They're not trying to make money at every corner and every turn. And you kind of look at them and go, why wouldn't you do this? Why are you doing this? That's not efficient. Why are you doing it this way? And it's their way of life. It's a different way of life.
It's a completely different value system.
Yes,
and like they're working to live.
You're taking a nap in the middle of the day. You lazy, unproductive loser. You're a loser for taking a nap in the middle of the day.
Because, we have this American mindset. I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing. I'm just saying it's what we have because we've grown up in it. That if you are not climbing the ladder, there is something wrong with you. If you are not becoming more than you were, you need to be achieving. Obviously financial is the main way, but you could say it in terms of Twitter followers or in terms of status at your job. It's like, if you are not climbing the ladder, if you are not becoming more powerful every moment, then you're a fucking loser. Like, what are you doing? Whereas other people they just don't think like that. I mean, I would say probably the majority of the world doesn't think like that.
Yeah. And the problems that creates. I had this epiphany last summer. I was listening to a podcast. Dan Harris is 10% Happier. I love it. And
I have that book. I haven't read it yet.
So good. He's so good, and his guests are really great. And he had this like Jewish Buddhist woman on. She's like 80 years old, and she was talking about, you know, purpose and what makes people happy. And when you just made me think of that, which is I'm that kind of person that just wants to constantly grow and learn and be a better person and gain more wisdom and read more books and be more thoughtful. But then she talked about, you know, what life is about. And she said something like, sometimes the greatest joy or purpose or what life is about is being a really kind person. And she described this woman who all of a sudden I had this epiphany, and it was like, oh my God, that's my grandmother, who I never thought much of either way. She was fine, but they were poor. She was uneducated completely. But that woman took like kids into her home all the time for a period as long as they needed. And some were families, some weren't. She took care of so many people by just taking care of them, letting them have a safe place to stay, feeding them, poor as hell, probably, you know, not educated. But I was like, that's also an amazing way to live your life, just being kind and thoughtful to, and that's a lot, just to bring it full circle, is what of Afghan culture.
Yes. I mean, yeah, there's entire societies, modern day, ancient, probably future as well, who are just not organized around the principle of increasing net worth. That is not the center of their lives, you know, and we are. I mean, even people like yourself who have kids, you know, obviously you need to make money because you need to take care of your family. And on some level, I'm sure you're going to start getting to that age where you're starting to think about leaving money to your kids, you know, about making sure that you're giving them. But think, no, not at all. But at the end of the day, really what you're doing is just sort of justifying your own sort of innate desire to sort of earn and to sort of find worth in earning.
Well, I actually think it's simpler than that, and I've gotten used to a certain lifestyle. And one of the horrible things about losing my job was we don't spend a lot of money. My wife and I wouldn't have quote nice things, but we always went on nice vacations. My wife likes nice vacations, resorts. I don't love that, but she does. I like it enough. But
it's your thing.
But it's our thing. It's my kids like as long as, you know, I'm with them, I don't care really where we are as much. And I don't like planning, whatever. So I thought that was over. I was like, well, that's one of the best things we could do is to go to these nice resorts, and that's over. And so my wife worked at this one. She taught yoga classes twice a day. And so it was free. It's like a barter basically. But I don't want to not have those, whatever I'm used to. I remember I flew first class for a year because I had a contract with CNN. And I remember thinking, I never want to go back. And I mean, I haven't flown first class since 2010. No, once because I've flown to LA. But
yeah, it's a very,
you get used to something. You don't want to lose that thing is what I'm saying. There's a threshold that you get comfortable with. It's hard to then live with less after you've had more. I think that's a fairly consistent truth.
Absolutely.
But I don't know.
Yes. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's a certain level. I'm not saying that the desire to make money is inherently evil or whatever. I'm saying it's just kind of in our DNA. Yeah. But obviously, it's like you need stuff. People need stuff. But I think, you know, I've always said, you know, if I could sign up to just live my current level of comfort, and I know that it will never radically change for better or for worse, I would. I don't need much. But I want to be able, I've always said I wanted to be appetizer rich.
Yeah.
I love it. If I'm at a restaurant and I want to get the soup, I get the soup. I don't think about it. That's what it is. I feel like
I've heard you say it before, but mine when I was 20, I wanted to be smoothie rich. I just wanted to be able to buy a $5 smoothie and not be worried about it. But I was only making $7.50 an hour at that point.
That's 1.5 smoothies.
I almost don't want to talk with you about this because it's so negative, but you're so good at talking about COVID.
Yes, I think people look to me as an authority, and in any particular context, or
I'm going to school board meeting tonight, and there's going to be a lot of people screaming about masks there. Yeah. If I were to take the microphone, what would I say? masks in school, the kids having to mandate, the kids wearing masks in schools. And also they want you to wear a mask at that meeting. But they were so outraged last time that they walked out. And so they're trying it again, but they're not making it mandatory to wear masks tonight at this meeting.
Boy. I mean,
and I wish masks.
On the one hand,
yeah.
I would maybe just, I'm not saying you can appeal to their, sensitive sides, because I don't think those will be on display, but it would be nice to kind of remind some of these people that it's like, these people are your neighbors. They're people in our community. I'm talking about the teachers, the people on the school board, the school security guards, and to just try to remember that, even whatever your beliefs are, to try to remember that this woman who you're screaming at, or, this doctor who you're fucking pointing in their car window as they leave saying, we know where you live. It's like, if you could just remember that these people are just trying to make a living and they're just trying to get along in life like you are, and they're doing the best they can. And you can think they're wrong if you want to think they're wrong, but there's no giant conspiracy. People aren't, I mean, if sort of what's happened in the last 2 weeks in Afghanistan has shown anything, it's that there's no capacity to organize anything along the lines of a massive conspiracy. There's no.
If we were that
good, you're giving people way too much credit.
Good, we would not have had people riding on wings.
Yes. And so try to remember that. Beyond that, though, it's like I'm at a point where I know that sort of mocking the anti-vaxxers is not helpful. Like I know gleefully sort of enjoying their, some conservative radio host dying of COVID. Like I get it. I get the Schadenfreude. I don't think that it's helpful. I don't think it's helpful to them. I don't think it's helpful to us emotionally. I get it. I get the feeling, but my take on it is I just want to move to a point of kind of indifference, that do what you want to do. But if you want to come in here, you have to be vaccinated, period. Sorry. And that's it. Yeah. And I'm not other than that, I'm not thinking about you. I'm not thinking about you. You have to give people room to sort of make the change on their own. You have to sort of leave the battlefield for people to change. And so it's like, I'm not saying be nice. I'm not saying like listen to their concerns, because they're all acting in fucking bad faith. They're all like that kid who falls down and then looks to see if anybody see them fall down before they start crying. They're all that. Yeah.
That was me.
And so pretend you're the parent whose kid has just fallen down and skinned their knee. Just pretend you didn't see it. Pretend you didn't see it. And I guarantee you, if you give them the space and the privacy, enough of them, not all of them, but enough of them will quietly eventually get vaccinated and will be able to fucking move on.
I think that's a great prescription analysis. And now I am glad I asked. I told you, you're good at it. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, bud.
Stand up. All right, Christian Finnegan. Christian Finnegan at Christ Finnegan, everybody. At Christ Finnegan on Twitter. Let him know you heard him here, and you can check him out in Atlantic City on Labor Day weekend at the Atlantic City Comedy Club, AtlanticCityComedyClub.com for tickets. And that's all I've got for you. What a week. I got a whole bunch of interviews in the can for next week already. Really great conversations, including with The Atlantic Magazine's James Fallows, which was just fantastic. And former general, retired general now, Daniel Bolger, who wrote a book, Why We Lost, and so much more. Very much looking forward to what I've got next week. Let me know who you want to hear on the show. And thanks again for any of you who joined me. Almost 60 people, I think, ended up hanging out with us on Thursday night. Thursdays at 8, we have a pretty magical experience. Sometimes it's just funny and fun, but it's almost always thoughtful, and people always share a lot, and it's just a great community. Please sign up. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. And here now, singer-songwriter John Carroll singing us out. You gotta stand up. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks so much for your support. I love you. Bye-bye.
They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball. other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.